I Own It will give you a front row seat to the positioning, bold moves, and sometimes the dog-eat-dog negotiations that go on behind the scenes of the deals that break the norms, set the precedent, and become the case study we devour as we harnessed our craft. Welcome to the season. Leverage. You got it or you don't. All right, we're here with Chris Snook today to talk about leverage. Chris, welcome to the show.
Awesome, thank you. It's great to be here.
So like we ask all our guests, what is leverage to you?
Leverage. So a couple things. First thing I think of is doing more with less, like just simply being able to do more with less. The other thing I think of is more of like the honed, like experience one is he or she who cares the least has all the control. So that's to me what leverage is.
So when was the first time you learned about leverage?
I'm working at this sub shop making whatever I'm making, I don't know, $5 an hour in high school, and I'm going all in like it's, the Super Bowl of business, right? Cut meat and whatever. And one of my teammates also was there with me, and so we'd work a lot of shifts together. And I loved the owner, thought he loved me. One day all of a sudden I come in and I'm fired. And I'm like, I don't understand why. And the reason that I found out I got fired was because this other kid who was a teammate of mine on the football team and younger than me apparently was like dealing weed or something. He did something of that nature. I'm not sure to this day what it was. And I kind of got like lumped in guilt by association with it. And so why I think that was probably like one of the first times is because it devastated me that like I lost a job. I couldn't explain why. I felt like it wasn't fair. And then in hindsight, like I think I started to realize like, sometimes like the risk of certain things is not worth the reward. Again, going back to like, doing more with less, or he who cares the least has a control. Like I cared a lot because I liked the job and I liked my reputation, and I felt kind of like wrongfully terminated. But as a kid, you're not gonna like complain to the labor board. It just showed me that like I didn't really have any control over that. Like it was one of those first things where my destiny in that moment wasn't really in my control. So he had leverage on me in that regard, even though I didn't think of it that way.
Stop and think about what Chris just told us. When he was younger, he used a bad experience and he turned it around immediately when he was older to create leverage for his business. But you know what's interesting about that? Being as young as you were, you felt you were on the wrong side of the lever.
Yeah.
But in hindsight, it taught you something. You could look back and say,
well,
it wasn't really that bad. Maybe I was on the better side of it.
I think, again, it's a good question because I don't think about it a lot, right?
Right?
Like I think about leverage now a whole different way.
Right.
But like when you're asking it about when was the first time, it's interesting because I was the kid who came from a middle class family when there was a middle class, and like had a lot of blessings in that regard. But I was not like, we were certainly not rich or wealthy. I played on the state, school teams and like the public school teams, and like so Notre Dame and the private schools, like all the kids with the new uniforms, like that was never going to be me. When I applied for colleges, none of them wanted me to be recruited or apply. Like I couldn't get in. And so I kind of had this like healthy chip. Maybe it wasn't always healthy, but I always had this chip on my shoulder because I felt like the lever was like pre-positioned against me. But it also made me really want to understand it, if that makes sense. Like I kind of was like probably really into business before I even knew that, just because I wanted to understand how to shift the thing. Like one of my core values at Atomic, which is our venture studio, and it's been this way forever, but one of my core values is if you want to see the table, bring the table.
Right.
And it's all about leverage, right? Like the only way you get to arrange the chairs is if you're the one who brings the table. And that's kind of always been how I've moved, I guess.
So in business, can you reflect back, when was the first time you experienced it in business? Now, obviously as a kid, you had experiences, but then you get into business, you've been a successful entrepreneur. What resonates with you that came out that says, this is when leverage really
the first
clicked?
time I understood it as a concept in business was probably in like 99. I started to read books that were about personal development or business related, and real estate was kind of one of the first things. accessible to me. I think I read Rich Dad Poor Dad after and I remember understanding loan to value. And so the first time I can say that I quantifiably understood what leverage could do is real estate, or just understanding concepts of investing in it, simply because I could buy $1 million property with 10% or 20% down or whatever it was, and use other people's money, the banks or whomever, to cover the rest.
So use knowledge to create leverage.
Well, that's one. I think that's what I realize is with ignorance, right? So that's a good point. Knowledge is a whole different thing. So we've all heard knowledge is power.
Right.
And fortunately, I had a mentor early on who's like, no, that's not true. Knowledge without action still shows up as ignorance. Right. Ignorance not being a term that's rude. Ignorance meaning I don't know what I don't know.
Right.
Right? So I could know how to lose weight, which related to me because I was in fitness and stuff in the early parts of my career and in undergrad. So I could know how to lose weight. I could know how to be in shape. But if I don't apply that knowledge, then we have 70% of the world that struggles with obesity and being overweight. So knowledge is not power, right? Knowledge is a kernel of potential power, but it's not. And so the leverage comes in, how do I apply that knowledge? And so early on, I realized whatever I'm getting knowledgeable about, I have to figure out the pragmatic application of it too. I better be able to put this into motion, because otherwise I'll just be a really smart dude who's broke, fat, miserable, and sick. And that's not gonna work.
Listen to what Chris just said. Knowledge is so powerful and create great leverage in your life. What he mentioned to us was you need to study and learn, and then you need to apply it. So take action. Apply your knowledge. I like what you said, because it's not only knowledge can create leverage, it's taking action. It's pulling the trigger. It's applying the knowledge and taking action, and maybe bringing in the resources you need to take the action as well.
Yeah, and so I started to the way that I tried to hack or growth hack, that wasn't a word back then in the 90s, but it is now. People kind of know what growth hack or life hack is. The way that I tried to growth hack that and gain leverage, I think, was I started to find mentors that had things that I thought I wanted, and then I just started to mirror them and model them. And ultimately, like a lot of people, I think there was probably a 2 or 3 year period there in my mid-20s where I definitely lost myself, because it's very hard when you haven't done certain things and then someone has something that you want. It's very hard not to model them all the way, right? But then I had this kind of other model in my mind that was what a good relationship looked like with my parents, what love, what integrity. And so if that got violated, sometimes I'd be lost, because it's well, how do I keep this true but also apply this knowledge and create the leverage I want? And I think everybody has to go through that, especially if they're younger. I don't know, the demographic listening to this or watching this right now, but anybody who's starting on that journey has to realize sometimes you have to lose yourself to find yourself again.
So use leverage, and you said, okay, well, I learned my lesson in leverage, and how did you implement what you learned from
Pure
leverage?
Trial and error, honestly, and failure. I mean, I played business in life, I still do, kind of how I played football. There's the ball, there's the guy in the other colored jersey, let's go, right? And you might get hurt, but that's not the goal. But if you can accept that you might get hurt, then you can go have fun. And it's exhilarating to play this game, right?
So let's switch gears. Our audience might not know that you are an AI guru, an expert. How does AI bring leverage to businesses?
All right, so one of the things that I learned as a framework that is totally about leverage is the law of compensation. And just like there's a law of gravity, we don't have to know how it works. We don't have to agree with it, right? There's a difference between man-made laws and universal laws, right? Man-made laws like speed limits, we could violate them, and if there's not a cop there, we could get away with it and no one gets fined and no one gets hurt. But if I walk off that ledge out there, gravity is going to take over, whether I'm a good person, a bad person, whether I paid my rent that month or didn't, right? Gravity doesn't care, it just treats us all the same. And compensation's like that, leverage is like that. In other words, leverage doesn't really care if you're a good person or a bad person, it just works.
Right.
And that's an important thing to remember, because one of the frameworks that I used was the need for what we do, our ability to fill that need, and how hard or easy it is to replace us. Those 3 things. So if we think about that and break it down, the need for what we do. So what is artificial intelligence? What need is it filling, right? Because we have human intelligence, which is kind of what we all understand, and it's different than artificial. And in some ways, better in different things, in some ways more limited, right? But if we think about intelligence, intelligence is, whether it's artificial or human, is the ultimate movement of thought energy into some physical reality. And it's that chain of like, it doesn't sit stagnant, it's constantly moving, right? Energy is neither created nor destroyed. Thought energy is the ultimate form of that, and intelligence is the harnessing of that thought energy into something real. And leverage is about, when it comes to income or when it comes to business, it's about, can I apply this to a need that is in demand? Well, the size of the need is going to dictate the size of my check, my valuation, or whatever. Okay, so I could pick a small need but be the King Kong in that and do well. I could pick a gargantuan need. What's the need for understanding artificial intelligence right now? It's massive, right? You agree?
I agree.
Like, it's the equivalent, and the easiest way is when electricity got in every home 100 years ago, in about 1923 in America, we never built a structure the same ever again. Like, we don't go back and purposely, unless you're in the Amish country, we don't go purposely build buildings that aren't wired with electricity, because it would be silly to do that. And it's so pervasive, like, we don't even think about it. The assumption is, and now it's internet, right? So like, if you go forward last 30 years, online became that. There was a point at which you had to intentionally go online.
Right.
Now, there's a whole generation of people that don't even understand, like, that doesn't even occur to a 12-year-old. They're like, if you go somewhere where there's no connectivity, you like, why are we here? So AI, take that and put that on steroids. The expectation is that we won't be talking about artificial intelligence 3 years from now the way that we're talking about it today, like it's this new multiplier of valuation. That's driven by market directives and other things. It's silly. Like 3 years, it's been around for 60 years. It's hit an inflection point where now it's becoming the thing that if you don't have it, right, you look like you're out of the know. But just because you talk about it doesn't mean you have it. And the need to understand how to harness it is bigger than ever, because you will not be in business any more than you would be building homes today if you weren't putting electricity in them. So like, no one's going to be advertising on the outside of their building electricity inside. Like, of course there is. And 3 years from now, you're not going to be like, our business is an AI company. No, it's not. Like, you sell skincare, you sell this. It's a given that you're harnessing artificial and human intelligence, right, or you're not going to be in business. So the need is massive. What's the lever? The brands, the people, the company, people like me, people like you, that understand how to fill the need in their vertical will get the lion's share of the rewards. Caveat number 3. The ease or difficulty by which they can be replaced. Replaced by what or who doesn't matter. So the ability to be replaced does not mean a direct replacement. It doesn't have to be someone who's better at you at your job. It doesn't have to be a robot. It could be a whole new industry. So we really have to think about who and what could replace us. And then when you think about artificial intelligence and what it's going to do to industries, it's not even just going to replace industries, it'll replace whole sections of industries. But that doesn't mean that there's not something new that now needs to be filled. It just means we don't know what that is yet. So in real estate, perfect example is Web3, blockchain, AI, like it might replace title companies. Why? Because I don't need humans to intermediate on this trust factor when I could do it with something like a blockchain with AI, with like certified, identity and NFTs wrapped around titles, and like I could do it differently and for a fraction of the cost, 24/7, 365, and I don't have to put $1,500 more on the escrow statement. So that'll probably get replaced completely.
Right. And eventually it'll build even more trust than having humans.
But that doesn't mean humans will be completely out of the real estate transaction process. Right. It means they won't do that part anymore.
Exactly.
And so understanding what part of your career path, your entity, your brand is going to be disrupted or have an inkling of it, and where you could learn how to imply this knowledge, blend it with and then harness it so that your human intelligence, artificial intelligence give you an actual competitive advantage before the other 50,000 people that do what you do it, means that you'll likely take the lion's share of rewards in that market, even if that market shrinks, because you will have been hard to replace. You will have filled a need, done it better than anybody else, and made it very hard to replace you. And those 3 things are how you create leverage, and artificial intelligence will just be the ultimate exposure lens by which we recognize these failures or these successes in that framework.
So how do Web3 and blockchain technologies create leverage?
What Web3 represents is this era of ownership, and the verbiage, the tech bro kind of way of saying it would be at the edge, right? Which is the edge of the network. Right. So users, fans, bands, not some centralized entity that controls all and hands out the portions to everyone else. When we had Web 1, we ripped down walled gardens and we liberated information. That became the information age, and for the first time we took it out of elite institutions and places where only people with privilege could get it, and we made it available to anybody that had a connection. And there was this promise to it because we democratized access to the world's information. But there was no business model. So it didn't make any money, and we went through the dot-com blow-up and everything else. Well, what's the business model that we've all understood and whatever? Advertising. So great. But as soon as we did that, the incentives became around attention and trust, right? The two most expensive currencies, the hardest to get and the easiest to lose. And the attention graph model is what formed into what's called Web 2. When we made the web read and writable, meaning now we could interact with each other. Blogs were the first version of it, MySpace for, and then social. What that really was about was user-generated content, read and write. But the problem was we didn't now own our identity anymore. Like email was a protocol. We could own email and we could take it from Hotmail to somewhere else, or we could move it. We could have one email address, we could move it. But then all of a sudden everybody figured out if we give it to them for free versus charge them for it, more people will have it. Well, how can we give it for them for free? Well, because we'll read their emails, Google, Hotmail, and we'll charge advertising against it because we'll now understand more about their attention graph, what they care about, what they're liking, what they're looking for, what trips they want to go on to, who they love. That got on steroids when the social media platforms took off. And all of us thought we were just getting this free utility sharing pictures. Now we're starting to realize, wait a minute, we actually don't own our identity, because when I get a smartphone, first thing it asks me to do is give it an Apple ID or get one, or a Gmail. Well, both of those are not Chris's ID or Ben's ID, they're Apple's ID. So what does that mean? I give up the ownership of my data proxy. Now, don't do anything, Chris, I'm not worried about that. I don't really value the data. Why do they care about me? Because it's not about you. It's about who you extrapolate out to, right? It's the persona, it's the common things we have.
It's the path that you
So
lead
Web
them.
2, and I'm winding this back just as an understanding of why it matters, because it does matter. Web 2 created more content than ever before, exponentially more, right? Metcalfe's law replaced Moore's law. And so when we had that, we had all these users now reading and writing and generating content, but it siloed up into 5 walled gardens. So we tore down the walled gardens of old, only to replace them with bigger ones called the Big 5 or Big 7. If you watch CNBC, the Mag 7, right? So all the stocks everybody wants to own. The problem is they own everything, right? And it's all walled off now. And so we're all just basically being harvested. It's the equivalent of if 100 years ago somebody came to us and said, hey, you own this piece of property we're all sitting on. I'd like to put an oil well because I've seen oil under the sand. We'd like to do that. Well, okay, what's my take? Oh, well, here's a lease. You can agree to it or not. Your neighbors did. And the royalty you'll get for letting us put an oil well and drill is this. Really? So you don't need anything from me but the permission and that? Yeah, you own the property, you own the mineral rights. I need your permission and I'll give you this royalty. Great. What do we do now? We put oil wells in every aspect of our house, from our pocket to our freaking wristwatch, to our Nest in the living room, to our smart doorbell. And we are literally putting oil wells that we pay hundreds, if not thousands of dollars for, to harvest everything out of us and get nothing for it. So whenever I tell people like that, they go, I'm going to throw it all away. My Alexa, my whatever. How do you know she's listening to you? Because she has to know when you say her name. We don't think about these stuff until recently. So that's Web 2. Fundamentally existential threat to humanity when you put the power of AI on top of it, because now we can create at orders of magnitude less, exponentially more content, which means fraud, fakes, bullshit, polarizing stuff. So take all the problems we see in society right now, where we're polarized left, polarized right, none of us can get along, but 50% of us supposedly want to be rational in the middle, but can't find anybody to vote for. Take that and put it on steroids. If we put AI, which we can't put it back in the bag, it's already out, on top of Web 2 business incentives and on top of quarterly earning business incentives, we do face existential threats to humanity. The good news is Web 3, which is ownership at the edge, it's respecting that data proxy. It's finding new incentive models to create real shared economies, not the faux versions that we've been sold with Airbnb and everything else, where, again, platforms still win. And it's saying this is going to matter not only to you, but it's also going to make more people able to transition through this cliff. The only way we could ever do something like universal basic income, right, is through a data dividend. Because the only commodity that there's going to be exponentially more of tomorrow than there is today, that we all share and we all kick off, whether we realize it or not, through data exhaust, just walking around with our accelerometers in our pocket, using Google Maps to get to our next meeting. The only thing we all share is data exhaust, down to 8 billion of us, because all of us technically have a cell phone or will have a smartphone by next year if we want one. And the only thing that will increase in value is data, because now we're getting better tools to refine that into something useful at the enterprise level. Web3 is about unlocking the promise and putting that ownership and that proxy back to the edge where now we're getting paid for our lease if we want to. You may not want to. Great, you'll be able to opt out. Harder than ever. You won't be able to opt out of everything. But you could choose to not have any of that stuff and go, I don't care. The utility's not worth it to me. My privacy, whatever shred of it I have left, is more valuable to me. My own anxiety around it is more valuable to me than whatever utility you're giving me for free. Or you could say, you know what? Happy to have you have all my crap because I don't care, but I want part of that CPM, that marketing dollar, because Facebook's collecting it all right now and I want my pro rata. And they could regulate that. They could make that part of the thing. And then that Web3 infrastructure would at least give us a chance to create some kind of value exchange that benefits the broader set of people that are contributing to that. That's the hope. Regardless, AI will not stop. It doesn't care. So it has the leverage. And those guiding it have the leverage. And at some point, we may not be guiding it. So we have a window right now. And again, why do I care? Why do I do this? I don't have any delusions of grandeur that I will be like impactful in this world. I just know I can't go to my deathbed not trying, because right now what I do know with 100% certainty, the cement on the next 10 years, which is really the next 100 years of humanity's future, which is my kids, your kids, grandkids, is wet, but it's been poured. I can't pour it, but I can put my fingerprints in it, and so can you. That's right. Brands and businesses can put their fingerprints in it. They can direct it. They can create new ethics. And if we don't, and you know that it's been poured, I can't live with myself if the future that my kids live into, that I'm going to live into in my old age, is more destructive, knowing that I maybe could have done something. That's what gets me out of bed. And it's that serious, but it's also that fun. It's a big game.
As Chris said, the cement is still wet. How are you going to leave your prints as you go forward with AI? Think about it. When does leverage go too far?
That's a great question. Just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do something. And leverage can go too far, because right now, you haven't had something this powerful since Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer's invention of the atomic bomb, which basically launched us into the nuclear era, was the ultimate deterrent in one way, because it became a weapon where the cost of using it was so high that your likelihood of actually using it became 0 or less. But one misstep, game over. Right. So AI has that same potential. It could do more good than bad, but we really have to start thinking about, as humans, if it learns from us, that's not necessarily a good thing. We've been pretty brutal to each other for 10,000 years if you look at history, right? So we're all worried about robots taking over. We'll kill ourselves. Like, what people don't realize is it's not a robot. Intelligence doesn't need a body. And intelligence does matter, especially when it's applied. And with algorithms and with AI, you're taking the knowledge gap and you are now turning it into expert immediately in whatever subject you want, because you're drawing on all of humanity's learnings and you're creating that as baseline. And that's now done and never has to be done again. And then it's learning with every turn of the crank from there. And so you literally have the most efficient knowledge application machine ever invented. That gap of knowledge is power now is actually knowledge is power.
But don't you think society will become more lazier and more reliant on AI?
I don't know. I
and
think
technology?
ultimately, I actually believe we will treat each other better. I actually believe, not just as a hope, like I fundamentally believe this gives us the chance to actually be human again. If we're really honest, like everybody listen to this, if everybody's really honest and they really audited their activity, like throughout their day. And they look back the last 15 years. And they ask this question: am I more human today than I was? Like, do I show up more human today, more empathy, more tolerant than I did 15 years ago? Forget the reason.
Right.
What's the answer? Most people's answer, if they're honest, is no. I'm not. I'm reactive, right? Why is that? Because you've been maliciously denied service attack against your cognition, your ability to think for 15 years, because you've carried around a smartphone just like me, and algorithmically it is giving you more of what it knows you're predisposed to like or fear, so that you click on it faster to pay the ad machine. The advertising industrial complex is worse than the military industrial complex, or equally as bad. And so for 15 years, anyone older than 35 can remember a time where they felt more human. Now, kids younger, right, like my son's age and lower, interestingly enough, they may not know why, but some of the trends right now is they're buying flip phones. They're carrying cameras, like they're buying like Nikon Ultras, like on eBay for double what they used to sell for, and they're carrying them into parties. And we could call that whatever it is. I don't think it's like, oh, they're super hyper aware. It's just this natural pendulum swinging back going, I need to be more present, because they've watched their older siblings or maybe even their parents completely endless scroll, and it's so not human, and they're so not happier, and yet they have access to theoretically everything. And I think artificial intelligence and leadership that understands the human side, that embraces empathy, starts to think about the organization, not just from the customer, but from the internal person, through the lens of what it means to be human, and how we could, as a brand, be more human and harness AI, right, to deliver a better output, while we can then spend more of our time being human as the interface. I think you have happier companies. I think you have more profitable companies. I think you have a happier society. I don't say that like because I'm a delusional idealist. I actually believe that will be an outcome if we want it to be. And I think more people want it than don't. I just don't think they have any power over it, because we've been programmatically disempowered by the algorithms for almost 2 decades.
Well, Chris Snook, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Leverage in AI. Doesn't get better than that.
No, it's the ultimate leverage.
Thank you. It's time to jump out of your comfort zone and start using leverage you have right in front of you. Are you ready to put in the hard work? If you said yes, then what are you waiting for? Let's go out there and own it together.